Imagine chasing your dreams in the dazzling lights of New York City. Only for those dreams to be cut short tragically.
Yeah,
That's exactly what happened to Katherine Woods.
it is.
She was this aspiring Broadway dancer, a young woman, and her life ended in a really brutal murder.
It's a case that really captivated the city. And yeah, today we're taking you on a deep dive into all the twists and turns of this investigation.
Exactly. And we've got a ton of sources that we're going to be looking at for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Court testimonies, interviews, news reports.
Hmm.
We're really going to try to unravel this mystery.
We are.
So think of us as your guides through this whole thing.
Absolutely.
So you're ready to kind of dive in and take a look at this case with us?
Let's do it.
All right, so let's start with Katherine Woods.
Okay.
Who is she? What do we know about her?
So she was a young woman. She was full of life, and she left everything behind in Ohio to chase her dreams of becoming a Broadway dancer.
Yeah, sounds like she was really talented too.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not just a whim. She had real talent.
Yeah, her friend Katie Miller described her as this like all-American Midwestern girl
Mm-hmm.
with just infectious energy, just drew people in,
Definitely.
like a star quality about her.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what her life could have been like,
Yeah.
if things had been different.
Absolutely. It's the question that haunts this case.
Yeah, for sure. So her life in New York City, though, wasn't exactly a fairy tale.
No, it wasn't.
She was juggling a lot of things, including a kind of complicated relationship with her ex-boyfriend,
Right.
David Hahn.
Yeah,
And that's where things start to get a little messy
they do.
because they had broken up, but David was still living in Catherine's apartment.
Interesting.
And to make things even more complicated, Katherine was secretly dating another man,
Wow.
Paul Cortez, a musician.
So two men in the picture
Exactly.
at the same time.
Yeah, can you imagine being Paul and finding out about David?
Oh my gosh. Talk about a tangled web.
Yeah, and it gets even more tangled because Katherine was actually helping David financially. Even after they broke up, she was paying some of his bills.
Really?
It makes you wonder about the dynamics of their relationship,
Yeah.
Was it just generosity on Katherine's part, or was there something more going on?
Right. Was she feeling obligated in some way?
Exactly. So it adds another layer to this case.
It does.
And as we dig deeper, we find out that Katherine was carrying a secret.
Ah.
A secret that really reveals a lot about the pressures of chasing your dreams in a city like New York.
Yeah. What was she hiding?
Okay, so to support her Broadway aspirations and make ends meet, Katherine was working as a dancer at a topless club,
Wow.
and she kept this hidden from her parents.
Understandably, probably didn't want to disappoint them.
Exactly. It makes you think about the emotional burden that she must have been carrying,
Yeah.
the weight of her dreams, the financial strain, and this secret life.
Right. It paints a very different picture than this carefree image of a young woman dancing her way to stardom.
It's a reminder that everyone has secrets.
Yeah, especially in a city that demands so much from you.
Yeah. And this secret would eventually come to light in a way that would change everything.
Oh, Sue.
So one night, Katherine called Paul. She was distraught, believing she'd been drugged and maybe even assaulted at the club.
Oh, no.
And Paul, in a moment of concern, he decided to call Katherine's father and tell him about her secret life.
Wow.
It's a decision that would have a huge ripple effect,
Yeah.
causing a rift between Katherine and Paul and ultimately bringing her secret life out into the open.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah,
One event leads to another, and it all culminates in tragedy.
exactly. And just
Yeah.
weeks after this revelation, Katherine's life is cut short in the most brutal way.
Oh, my gosh.
It was actually David Hahn who found her body.
Really?
He told police that he'd returned to the apartment and found her there stabbed multiple times with her throat cut.
That's awful.
The brutality of the scene, it shocked even the most seasoned investigators.
I can imagine.
I mean, can you picture that a young woman full of dreams lying lifeless in her own apartment? So the immediate question, of course, is who could have done something like this?
Right. Who would want to hurt her?
Suspicion naturally fell on David.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the one who found the body after all. And his shoe size, it matched the bloody footprints at the scene.
Oh, wow.
But as detectives questioned him, they noticed something strange about his demeanor.
What was it?
He seemed really detached, lacking the kind of emotional response you'd expect from someone who had just discovered their ex-girlfriend brutally murdered.
So, almost too calm.
Yeah, it raised a red flag for the investigators.
Of course.
Could this lack of emotion be a sign of guilt?
Right. Or was he just in shock?
Exactly. It was a question that would linger throughout the investigation.
Yeah.
But as they dug deeper, they started uncovering more and more about Paul Cortez, the other man in Catherine's life.
Oh,
And what they found was really disturbing.
what was it?
So one of the biggest discoveries were Paul's personal writings,
What do you mean?
like his journals. And they were filled with these violent images and disturbing passages that described a woman's throat being cut.
Oh my gosh.
And the chilling part is that these entries were written months before Catherine's murder.
That sends chills down my spine.
It's like something out of a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
These dark thoughts on paper mirroring the reality of Catherine's death.
And it wasn't just his writing, right?
No, it wasn't.
Didn't his alibi start to fall apart too?
Yeah, you're right. His cell phone records actually placed him near Catherine's apartment around the time of her death,
Really?
which contradicted what he had initially told police.
Wow.
And his explanation for missing band practice that night, which could have been a potential alibi, it seemed really flimsy.
So all the pieces were starting to point toward Paul.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle coming together, but some pieces are still missing.
Definitely intriguing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this young woman brutally murdered, an ex-boyfriend acting kind of strange, and a new boyfriend who writes about violence.
Yeah, it's like ripped from the pages of a true crime novel.
Totally. And the stakes are high.
They are. We can't lose sight of the fact that we're dealing with real people here.
Absolutely. So as the investigation went on, the focus really shifted toward Paul Cortez. But was the evidence against him strong enough to convict?
Well, that's what the prosecution had to prove, right?
Right. And it wasn't going to be easy.
No.
I mean, those journal entries, they were disturbing for sure.
Yeah.
But were they actually proof that he killed Katherine?
Right. I mean, they could just be dark fantasies or some kind of artistic expression.
Exactly. It makes you think about how someone's art can be used against them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's a real gray area, legally and ethically.
For sure. But the prosecution argued that those writings, combined with Paul's alibi and the fact that he was near the crime scene, all pointed to his guilt. But hold on a second.
Yeah.
Didn't the defense raise some pretty big doubts about the case?
They did.
I mean, there wasn't any DNA evidence linking Paul to the crime scene.
That's true.
And what about those unidentified hairs that were found in Catherine's hand?
Yeah, those were never tested.
Exactly. So could those hairs have belonged to someone else?
Possibly someone she met at the club.
It makes you wonder if the police really looked into all the possibilities or if they just focused on Paul.
Right, maybe they missed something.
Exactly. And the defense really pushed that idea.
They did.
They even said that David Hahn could have been involved.
Oh, wow.
Remember, he needed money from Catherine, and a neighbor said they heard screams coming from the apartment before David said he left.
So now we have two possible suspects.
It's true, and neither one has a clear motive.
It's enough to keep you up at night just trying to figure it all out.
For sure. And in the end, it was the jury who had to decide who to believe.
That's right.
And that trial, it was a wild ride.
It sounds like it.
There were all these twists and turns, conflicting stories, and a piece of evidence that would change everything.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
So there was this surveillance video from a P.C. Richards store,
Okay.
and the defense thought it would prove that Paul was wearing shoes and not boots the day Catherine was killed.
Okay.
But it backfired in a big way.
Wait, how could a video meant to help him end up hurting him?
Well, the jury saw it differently.
What do you mean?
They thought it showed Paul wearing boots that were just like the ones the killer wore.
Oh, wow.
So it became a key piece of evidence, and it led to a guilty verdict.
It just goes to show that evidence can be interpreted in different ways.
Totally. And sometimes it's not just about the evidence itself, but how it's presented.
Right, like how it fits into the story.
Exactly. The prosecution made a convincing argument using Paul's writings, his shaky alibi, and that video. They convinced the jury that he was the one who killed Catherine.
But even with the guilty verdict, there were still some questions left unanswered.
For sure. So we have a guilty verdict, but it doesn't feel like the end of the story.
Yeah, it really highlights how justice can be complicated sometimes.
It's not always clear cut, you know?
Right.
And in this case, those unanswered questions, they just keep coming back to those hairs.
Yeah, the ones found in Catherine's hand.
Right. And the whole question of David Hahn, could he have played a bigger part in all of this than we initially thought?
The defense definitely tried to make us think so.
They did. They kept bringing up the money and that neighbor's story about the screams.
It's like we're trying to untangle a giant knot.
Yeah.
But I think focusing only on those things makes us forget something really important.
What do you mean?
The human side of it all.
You're right.
We've talked about evidence and legal stuff, but what about the people affected by this?
Yeah, Catherine's family. I mean, they lost their daughter.
Imagine the pain they must be going through.
It's heartbreaking.
This young woman with so much potential, and it was all taken away.
And for them, that guilty verdict, maybe it brings some closure,
Maybe.
but it can't erase the pain, you know?
No, of course not.
And they have to live with the fact that there's still these unanswered questions.
Exactly.
So it's a reminder that justice doesn't always equal healing.
That's a good point.
And I think that's why this case is still so interesting to people. It makes us question everything, you know.
It does.
The legal system, how we see evidence, the whole idea of doubt.
It reminds us that things aren't always black and white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it pushes us to think critically and to be open to different possibilities.
We should always question what we think we know.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the tragic story of Katherine Woods, we want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
Don't settle for easy answers.
Right.
Question everything and keep searching for the truth.
Even when it's hard.
Exactly. And thank you for joining us on this journey through the complexities of this case.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating discussion.
It has. And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive, where we'll continue to explore the stories that shape our world.